Hello and welcome to another edition of the Fourmation Podcast. It's episode number 42. We're back. The Premier League is also back, and we're here to look ahead to the weekend's action while also giving our initial thoughts on a few teams that we saw last weekend on the opening weekend. But first of all, there's an elephant in the room that we need to address. Those watching on YouTube will have probably already noticed that there are only three of us on this call. We're called the Fourmation, and with three people, it doesn't quite work. Harry is away on holiday for a few days, so we hope he enjoys that. We had planned to get another person on to make sure that we continued to live up to our name. We haven't managed to do that. That's not anyone's fault, really. We're probably all at fault in that we left it a little bit late in terms of scheduling when we were going to do this. And we wanted to make sure that, it went out before the weekend. So we're going with just the three of us for this one. We'll see how it works. Like I said, ideally we would have got a guest on, but I'm sure it'll be fine. We're going to give it a go, aren't we? Anyway, I already mentioned it. The first weekend in the Premier League is done. I saw several journalists and pundits suggesting that it was maybe the most entertaining opening weekend in the top flight for a few years. Sam, is that something you'd be inclined to agree with?
Yeah, there's some very entertaining games, a few shocks. Obviously, Man City dropping points on the opening day, United blowing away Leeds, Liverpool, Chelsea also looking strong. So it's only the first day, obviously, so we can't take too much from it, but it looks to be setting up to be quite a close title race with quite a few teams involved.
Yeah, absolutely it does. And I think the opening day is always one of those where people are hesitant to look at the table. I always think Gary Lineker every single year on Match of the Day gets to the end of the show and goes, it doesn't mean anything, but we're going to show you it anyway. But yeah, 37 games to go, so a long way to go, and certainly a good thing for my team. Devon, was there a performance by one team in particular that maybe impressed you the most? Have you got one in mind?
I think Chelsea were rather dominant, and it just seems like they just continued from last season with Tuchel's influence. But I was impressed with, probably you've got to go with the first game of the season, Brentford, especially their first half performance. Obviously going ahead, but they took Arsenal were toothless. I think we'll get into it a little bit, but they really took the game to Arsenal, got that first goal, consolidated, and then got the second one in the second half when Arsenal were putting a bit of pressure on.
Yeah, I think we certainly will get on to talk about both of those teams in pretty different lights, I would expect. But before we do that and start to look ahead to some of the fixtures coming up, we thought we'd update you on our FPL league because the Fourmation Invitational is back for a second season. After game week 1, sitting at the top of the league is somebody called Kun Aguero. So it's great to know that we have the Man City legend as a listener. I think it said that the player is from Nigeria, so maybe we've stretched as far as Africa, which is exciting, to be fair.
Has both Fernandez and Salah, I imagine.
Yeah, absolutely. I think they had the triple captainship on Salah as well, which was
big points.
Maybe a good time to play it. It was a gamble, but it certainly paid off. He finished on 117 points. So we'll see if he can retain his lead this weekend. The code to join the league is KMG5EU. That'll be in the description below. We've also got a head-to-head league this season, which we came up with the idea the night before the season. That's between the four of us on the pod. I think Harry was the highest scorer between the four of us last week. He beat Sam in their head-to-head, and then I managed to beat Devon. But as we've said for the actual Premier League, it's a long season, so
I've already made the mistakes of last year. I completely forgot about the captain side of it, and then when I looked, my captain was Kane and my vice captain was Emi Martinez. So just didn't have a good one.
Yeah, I do think the the captaincy is pretty pivotal, isn't it? Which I think can ruin it sometimes, because you can have a pretty good week with several players scoring, but if you've got your captaincy on a player who does nothing, then you're struggling. I don't know. It's difficult, but we'll try and keep you up. Go on, Dev.
Is that what they tell you on the FPL podcast you listen to? or is that from Toby? Ooh.
No, I of course I only listen to one podcast, and that is this one. That is what the experts tend to say. We will try and keep you updated on how this goes on most weeks, and hopefully we're able to keep updating our teams, because if not, then it could go pear-shaped. But anyway, on with the main bulk of the podcast. So we've got the second round of Premier League fixtures this coming weekend. And before we did this, we've kind of picked out the games that we think stand out as some storylines to come out of it. But obviously, as we go through these, we want to look back at what went on last weekend too, because that's kind of all that we've got to go on. The first one that I've got written down on my list of games for this weekend is Crystal Palace against Brentford. The reason for that is because it'll be Patrick Vieira's first home game as the manager of Palace. And they didn't enjoy the opening weekend very much. Devon already mentioned they were beaten by Chelsea at Stamford Bridge. But I think, Sam, it's fair to say that they've probably been eyeing this game up as the first one where they could realistically get some points on the board. Would you agree with that?
Yeah, you'd imagine so, considering the ambitions Chelsea had this season and how good they've looked already. But it was definitely a poor start. A lot of change has gone on at Palace, as we mentioned in our Premier League preview video, in the managerial sense and in the team sense. 9 first-teamers left the club over the summer. But they brought in some decent players as well. Mark Gay played obviously against his old team, but it was a disappointing start. They obviously didn't expect to win in Chelsea, like you say, but they'll definitely be eyeing up this one against Brentford at home at Selhurst Park in front of their fans again. Against Brentford, obviously a newly promoted side, but like Devon mentioned earlier, they had a very strong start against Arsenal, so it's certainly not a gimme. I think it's going to take a long time for Palace to sort of get their feet under the table a little bit with Vieira in charge. He said that after the game, it might take a while to implement some of his ideas, such a radical change of playing style from Roy Hodgson, who was obviously a lot safer, a lot less expansive, as we saw Palace try to be against Chelsea, but didn't work out in the end. But like you say, they'll be looking to get 3 points in this one if they want to stay in the league at least.
Yeah, absolutely. And I had a little look at their fixtures after this one before we started recording, and they look pretty tough, to be honest. They've got West Ham, Tottenham, then Liverpool, and then after that they play their bitter rivals Brighton. So there might be a little bit of pressure on this one, maybe, Dev.
Yeah, it certainly do. Sorry, it'll certainly do Vieira the world of good. Obviously, the last time Palace went for a style change, it didn't work out for Frank de Boer, and Vieira would probably have that in the back of his mind, thinking if I get through these games without any points, I'm going to be facing the chop early, and maybe Palace will go straight back to a reserved manager. Maybe not, because of the sort of money they've spent and the gamble they've taken. They might want to stick it out a little bit better. But I think the players that they've got now, I think they're still 1 or 2 away from there. I think they need someone like more of a ball-winning midfielder that's actually going to complement the rest of the side rather than your James McArthurs and stuff like that. But them type of players anyway. And I think if Palace can ease the pressure off there, it'll be really good. But they are coming into a game where Brentford will be higher confidence. The fans are back. And as they showed on Friday night, the occasion didn't get to them.
Well, he's still a little bit unsure, clearly, Vieira, on what he wants to do, how he wants to set up, considering only one of his new signings started the game, and he also went with a back 4 for some period of the game and then changed to a back 5, considering how poorly they started the first half against Chelsea, not a single shot or touch in their box. So he's still a bit unsure. Clearly, he's had the pre-season, but he's not entirely certain on what he wants to do with this Palace side, which he needs to sort out quickly because these games will come thick and fast.
But even having said that, do you think that maybe brings a bit more excitement for Palace fans? Because it felt like they were very predictable under Hodgson, and I think the fan base were pretty split towards the end in terms of, I think a few of them were ready for this change. So the fact that they're trying out these different formations is exciting, although obviously it's a risk too, isn't it?
It is exciting, but you've also got to live with the consequences. If it doesn't go well, then they're facing a long season ahead of them. So yeah, like you say, it's very different to what they had under Roy Hodgson. They had great stability under him, but they never really looked like pushing ahead from being a bottom half team. And maybe there's more potential with Vieira in charge, but again, they've got to figure it out quickly because the Premier League's not a forgiving league for these sort of things.
Absolutely, it isn't. We've mentioned already about Brentford's win over Arsenal, and we're going to come on to probably discuss just how poor Arsenal were. But Devon, Brentford still deserve a lot of credit for how they approached that game, don't they, last week?
Yeah, new sides can tend to get really nervous and sort of not go with what they know and change the style. But I think they shocked Arsenal in actually coming out firing from the blocks. Obviously, Brian Bueno was more potent than he normally was in terms of, than what we've seen in the second half of last season. He just came out, he was running at defence. He was, his neat touches to get through that left-hand side. But they just took the game plan, did it perfectly, as I've said. Got that goal through Sergio Canos. That's, he's always seemed to have the Premier League potential. However, he's not really shown that on a consistent basis. So it'll be interesting to see if he can kick on. And they got in behind well. And then once they had that first goal, they continued to attack. And then as soon as they noticed the change in momentum, they did sit back a little bit, defend, consolidate. Arsenal had some good chances. I think David Reyes had huge questions, especially from us on this podcast, about what his abilities like, but he made some terrific saves. And then obviously the sucker punch was at the end for the long throw. Poor defending again from Arsenal. It was just a mirror of what we've seen for the last 4 seasons, maybe.
Shocking.
And yeah, great for Brentford in front of a full stadium. Their first time they've had a full stadium, I think, at the community Brentford Stadium. But it's about that next game, because as we've seen, some of the new teams have this little bit of excitement at the start, and once that fallout and the newness is worn off, is how they react and how they go forward. Because if you don't react well, you find yourself slumping back down to the Championship, like the likes of West Brom and Fulham have in recent years.
Yeah, their lack of experience, like a Premier League experience anyway, in their squad worked in this instance, because they were, like Devon mentioned already, they were vibrant, skillful, energetic, really physical, flying into challenges, really quick on their counter-attack, really swift in all the phases of play. So there was a lot of enthusiasm in that squad. There's a lot of enthusiasm in their manager, in Thomas Frank. They're a very well run club, and they've got some exciting players. I did mention in the preview that they're going to need contributions from their wingers, that Devon already mentioned, Sergio Canos and Mbeumo, and they've already shown in that game against Arsenal that they can play at this level. Tony didn't score, but he still put in a man of the match performance and really hassled Arsenal's back line. It was obviously a poor debut for Ben White. Pablo Mari had a poor game as well at the back, so he really got into them, and that was the turning point in the game, really, how aggressive Brentford were in the press when Arsenal tried to play out as well. So a really impressive start for them and start to the league as a whole.
And Devon, I think it was Gary Neville after the game on Sky was kind of linking Brentford with Leeds when they came up last season in terms of the way they were approaching it. And it seems as if that's something they're going to be wanting to do all season. And it feels as if that's the right way to do it. Would you agree?
I think so. I think sometimes you've got to be a bit braver in these situations. And if you do, and in the Premier League, especially with the quality of teams in there, if you do invite pressure, they often take it. I think the situation is different to Leeds. I think Marcelo Bielsa is he's sort of well respected anyway as a manager, and tactically he knows what he's doing. Apart from this opening weekend, we'll skip on that. But I think with Thomas Frank for the last 2 seasons in the Championship, he's shown that vulnerability that Brentford can stagnate during halfway through the season. It was only the last couple of games where you thought, actually, Brentford are going to do this.
Yeah, I think that's certainly a valuable point, because it does feel like they've almost been waiting for this promotion for 2 or 3 seasons, doesn't it? I think
they're an unknown quantity, which probably could be an advantage to them over the other 2 promoted sides, Norwich and Watford, who have been in the Premier League quite recently, and a lot of their players who were in the Premier League last time are still in their squads. So that could be a blessing or a curse in their case. And I guess we'll just have to wait and see.
Yeah, I think you're right. And I think I don't want to keep referencing like Gary Neville and Carragher, but I think you could see that they were enjoying seeing new players, weren't they? That they don't really have the opportunity to watch. I'm sure they watch the Championship when they can, but probably not a lot of it. So to see these come up, and like we've already mentioned, just how fresh they look and how determined they look to succeed, I think it is encouraging for them in particular. So they'll definitely be one to watch out for this season. We'll move on then to another new manager. That's Bruno Lage, who, of course, has stepped in at Wolves this summer. His first game in charge last week was also away from home. They also suffered defeat. That was at Leicester. So it was probably another game that they weren't really expected to get anything from. But it's his first home game this weekend as Wolves manager. And I just want to put this scenario in your head, Devon. If you just stepped in as Wolves manager, how would you feel about, in your first home game, having to go up against the old guy who all the fans love? How would you feel if that was your first? If that was the first time you're meeting those fans, would you feel a bit indifferent about
that? I think in my head as a manager, I'd be like, right, let's put in a performance which will
use
make
it as motivation.
Forget all about that. Yeah, just let's forget about him. It's sort of like analogy time. I had an analogy similar like this for the what we've got planned later. But if you're going out with a girl and she gets really close with the family, and then you're at a party and they end up inviting her, it's sort of like getting really mad, and you think, no, focus on me, focus on this new relationship. But I think there's a lot more to come from Wolves in terms of who. Again, we need to learn what Bruno Lage is all about. Just because the simple fact is that even from judging from the Leicester game, it just looked like they were. Traore with their only sort of impact going forward. They were just quick on the counter, which we expect from a Wolves side, even Nuno's Wolves side. So it will be interesting to see how Nuno comes back and how Wolves sort of adapt to the home. It must be a weird situation because we saw what Nuno. I think some of the fans are a bit aggrieved because they've spent so much time in the last game of the season when they were allowed in, giving all their love to Nuno, and actually he's back 2 games later.
Yeah, I have to say, first of all, excellent analogy. We might have to clip that up and get it on all our socials.
He loves that.
No, but I think it's a good point you make at the end there, in that fact that Nuno had his kind of goodbye in front of, 10,000 fans at Molineux last season for that Man United game. I hope for the new guy's sake that, the Wolves fans can kind of put that aside, maybe give Nuno just a little clap at the start, but mainly focus on this guy, because he's going to need their support, aren't they?
Absolutely. And he's not their manager anymore, and they've got to get used to that. So I think under Lage, he's promised a more attacking approach than we saw for Nuno when he was at Wolves. But the problem for me is where the goals are going to come from. Obviously, Raul Jimenez on his return against Leicester had a very quiet game. Adama Traore, that Devon mentioned, I think he's only scored 7 goals in the Premier League. at the age of 25 now, a very exciting player, don't get me wrong. He's fun to watch, but his end product leaves a lot to be desired in a lot of senses. They're very solid at the back with Connor Cody at the centre of that, but I just worry where the goals are going to come from Wolves in the end.
And
I think
it's unrealistic to expect Jimenez to come back from the injury that he's had and just switch it on again, isn't it? It's just not going to happen.
No, I mean, a fractured skull, I have no idea what that feels like, but I can't imagine it's very fun, and it is going to take a while for him to get back to speed. So, like I say, you just wonder where the goals are going to come from, and it's going to be tough again against a Spurs defence that were on great form against Manchester City, the best attacking team in the league. So, be interesting to see how they counter that.
Sorry, Devon, did you have something to add on Traore, was it?
Yeah, I was just going to say with Traore, loads of people, especially when he linked with Liverpool and he had that spell scoring against City, and they're saying how good Traore is. And every time someone does that, all I can think about is his time at Villa, his time at Middlesbrough, seeing him against Sheffield Wednesday, where it was quick, it was strong, but he had no end product at all. He couldn't finish, he couldn't cross, and he just looked woeful. And even now, we're still seeing glimpses of that. I mean, he went through in the first half against Leicester, clean for own goal. Probably had two, strikers when they have too long to think about it, they often mess it up. But that should have been a simple finish, that or at least hit the target. And he had one in the second half as well, which were a bit more difficult. But he hit it straight at Kasper Schmeichel. So I think if you shoulder yourself on wanting Traore to be your main outlet, then you're going to struggle just because he's so one-dimensional.
Pedro Neto, who they relied on when Jimenez was injured, is out with an injury as well at the moment as well. So it's going to be tough for them. But like you say, though, Traore, Dev, it's a shame really, because he could be a really dangerous player, because he's got all the physical attributes. We saw, I think it was against Man City when he scored that double shot. We saw if he can use his pace and his power and couple it with great finishing, then he can be an extremely dangerous player, and he can do that against any side in the league. So hopefully he can find that clinical side this season.
Yeah, and I've also got a feeling that he'll have a bit of a point to prove to Nuno as well, because you think back to last season, Traore spent most of his time on the bench. I know in the 2 seasons before he played a more prominent role, and that was maybe where Wolves kind of flourished a little bit more. But I think he was kind of left out in the cold a bit last year. So he'll want to show Nuno that he was wrong to leave him out. As for Tottenham then, because obviously that's another new manager. Of course it is Nuno. It was really impressive from them last week against City, wasn't it? And I don't know where that performance came from, because I have to say before the game I was fearing the worst for Spurs, but they came up with it, and fair play to them, Devon.
Yeah, a big result. Sorry, big result for Spurs, especially for the confidence, because I think everybody in the Nans had written them off before the season start. Because, I mean, I think Spurs fans were fearing the worst for the season, not just Man City, and you don't want a heavy defeat on the first opening day, because it can really spiral your plans and you can overthink things. But for Spurs to go out there, beat Manchester City without Harry Kane is just a big relief, I think, for a lot of people, and it might even give City the incentive to go and say, you know what, is that 160 million to get it out of Spurs. And I think until that saga's put to rest, I think it's just going to keep going on and unsettle Spurs. So it was good to see that Spurs could put that behind them, and the rest of the team says, you know what, we're not just a one-man team. We've still got Son, who's pretty much going to be, it feels like, well, Nuno, it might be, maybe the X is with Son now, and Traore is the one that's actually the one that's jealous. But I think Nuno will thrive with this sort of confidence from the opening game, and then go into Molineux, where he'll probably will get some love. I think it'll just carry on going.
Yeah, that really was Sonny's game last week, wasn't it? Sorry, Sam, go on.
Yeah, I didn't manage to catch the full game, but just from the highlights, you could tell what City's game plan was, and that was to overload the left-hand side with Grealish, Sterling, Mendy. So what a game for Tanganga at right back. I don't think he's played there for Spurs before. I think he's played mainly at centre back when he has played. Just 22 years old, coming off a few injuries. It looked like he was going to be loaned out this season, but with the performance he put in there, it looks like he'll be in Nuno's plans going forward. So you have to commend what he was able to do, countering all those players, the £100 million, Jack Grealish especially.
Yeah, I think what impressed a lot of people with Tanganga was he didn't have any fear in terms of just fouling someone if it was needed to happen, if it needed to happen, because I think it was midway through the first half and they showed a graphic on screen which was fouls made, and Tanganga was on 4 and all the other players were only on 1, and there was a question, should he have gone into the book for persistent fouling? But I think the offences he was committing, it wasn't like they were dirty challenges or anything like that, but he was just in there to make the interception and, just take a player out when it was needed. And I think there are some players maybe nowadays who don't do that enough and don't get stuck in enough. And I think that's all that the Spurs fans really wanted to see. What did you think of that, Devon?
I think it's needed. I mean, the game's lost a lot of physical contact over the years, and with VAR from last season, which I think if we mention any sort of things that we had at the weekend, I think VAR's actual step back and less inclusion was a big beneficiary of the opening week, because having that human error element in there really benefited a lot of the matches. But we're not here to talk about VAR currently.
Thankfully, we don't need to.
Tanganga was very, very good. I think even when he first came through, I think he showed that fearlessness at the start, and I think it's good that he's setting really a good example to the rest of the defenders, because that's the biggest question we've had about Spurs is where are the centre half pairings? Because when you lose someone as experienced as Alderweireld and Vertonghen, you're obviously going to have a big someone needs to fill that role, and whether it is Sanchez, whether he can step up, I'm not sure, but. City just seem to get more and more frustrated, and we've seen that when it doesn't work for City, there's a fine line with City. If they are frustrated, and it's what the opposition does, because a lot of teams like Crystal Palace or Watford would just still give City that respect and let them continue doing it until it works. But with Tottenham, they said, right, we're going to frustrate them, but then we're going to take advantage. And we know what Tottenham are like on the counter. They've done it for the last 3 seasons now. So they just punished him. What a goal from Son. I think he was just lovely. It was simple, but just the amount of curve on the floor as well. And as a goalkeeper, when I first saw it, you're thinking, probably should have tipped that wide or got down to it. But actually, when you look at other angles, it's just so well hit that it was brilliant.
Yeah, absolutely. To score from the position where he picked the ball up, I know Sonny is just the king of like the counter attack, but yeah, to get to goal from where he was, I think was really impressive.
That's the thing with those Spurs, their team, that front three, especially that they played against City, of Son, Bergwijn and Lucas Moura, certainly suits the counter attacking style. It's just against teams lower down the league, or maybe sit back a bit more. I'll be interested to see how Nuno adopts that, how he'll break teams down without Harry Kane in the team, what he might come back into the team. We don't know what's going to happen there, but be interesting to see. But their players, the players that they've got definitely suits that counter-attacking style, and they can be dangerous in the games against the bigger teams that like to push forward a lot more.
Yeah, absolutely. A great start for Nuno and for Tanganga too, because I remember a couple of weeks ago seeing rumours with potentially being loaned out.
I think he's going to go to Galatasaray. I think that was pretty close. And then performance like that, he's back in the plans.
Very much so. I don't think he's going to be going anywhere anymore. But that win for Spurs against Man City only made it a worse weekend for their North London rivals, Arsenal. We've already hinted at this several times in the last half an hour, but they were so clearly second best in their game against Brentford on Friday evening. And I know Aubameyang and Lacazette were both missing through illness, but Devon, there's still no real excuse for the performance they produced, is there?
No, because there's still a lot of them players are in the first team, and if they weren't if they're not good enough, they won't be selected for that 11. I feel sorry for Balogun because he seemed really isolated, especially when like we know what you get with Smith Rowe. He starts to sort of venture towards the right hand side and leaves no one really running in behind. I think even with that, the team's not really good enough in terms of. I think Arsenal now are a mid-table side, just because they're like mid-table upwards, just because they don't have. Obviously, Aubameyang was brilliant and probably still is, and Lacazette chips in, but we're just seeing the same problems from Arsenal, and there seems just a lack of urgency to sort of fill that in, because we said about defenders of their defence, they brought in Ben White, who is a fantastic player, but I think he's only really a fantastic player when he's got somebody that is more of a Lewis Dunk / Liam Cooper figure, someone that, because Ben White's not great in the air, them two players, the player next to him has to be sort of the guy that wins the headers, is aggressive, wins the ball back, makes the challenges, and then Ben White's the player that really plays it. And I'd rather, if Arsenal are going to play like that, we sort of Mario Gabriel next to him, I'd rather see Ben White step into sort of a central defensive midfield role and be more of a ball player there than can drop, because he just got bullied, didn't he? And Tony really picked his pocket a few times there, but I don't know what to say with Arsenal. Like the areas there and Ramsdale coming in, it's like they just don't know what they want to do with this Arsenal squad.
Yeah, the signings coming in is certainly interesting. Just on White, before we move on, is there not an argument to say that every defender who's playing, as centre back should be capable of winning headers and,
yeah.
That's just the basics. I take your point that he's. I take your point that he's not maybe the most physical, but he still should be able to do that for 50 million quid.
Nobody is in this Arsenal team, George, and the game plan to beat them is way too obvious. Just get in their faces, be physical, be intense like Brentford were. That back line, that Ben White, Pablo Mari, Callum Chambers. I thought Smith Rowe and Tierney linked up well on the left. On some occasions, they looked the bright spot, but it's been a recurring problem with Arsenal these last 10 years. They're just not. They don't have the fight. They don't have the backbone. They don't have the physicality in their team when they're under the cosh. They don't have a plan B necessarily to fight back and show their own mental strength. And even with Lacazette and Aubameyang in this team, I think they would have struggled because of the pressure that Brentford were applying on the defenders as they tried to come out with the ball. Yeah,
I have to say, I almost felt pretty jealous of Brentford and their opening day fixture when we went and played Liverpool on Saturday, because I feel like if we had been presented with that, I think we could have made a better start. I know we'll play them eventually. I just think it was kind of a nice start for them. Maybe
that second goal made me want to tear my hair out. Like, you can't. What is Leno doing? Like, you cannot let the ball bounce in the box from a corner and just let it go and challenge like that. It's just weak. There's no other word to describe it. And he was looking for a foul from Janssen, but he wasn't doing much. He was just stood in front of him.
Yeah, and Ramsdale, as you said there, Devon, on his way in, do you think he's capable of maybe pushing Leno out of the team and taking that number one shirt? How do you see that playing out?
That's what you've discussed. I think it's just going to turn into a Man United situation where they've got De Gea, they've got Henderson, and they're sort of they don't know which one they want to pick. And I think we'll see a spell of Ramsdale, then we'll probably see a spell of Leno. And I think it's, in terms of long term, it's a bit of a gamble, but it could pay off just because he's got that time to develop. And I think the more mentality side of Ramsdale needs to be worked on, because he does make some fantastic saves. He did it at Sheffield United last year, but he is very prone to some glaring errors, and I think as soon as he improves on that side, it'll be okay. But I don't think it's a massive improvement on Leno.
So Arsenal had a very difficult start to the season last week, and it could get even worse for them this weekend. Maybe I'm preempting it by saying that, but they are playing Chelsea at the Emirates on Sunday. Sam, do you fear for Ben White going up against new signing Romelu Lukaku?
Fear is an understatement, really, because especially considering the way Chelsea played against Palace, a lot of their key players still out, like you mentioned. Lukaku still has to come in, and he's just a different beast altogether to what they had previously. Kante, Ziyech, Havertz started on the bench, so did Thiago Silva. So they've still got so many players to come in. Their squad depth this season is why a lot of people are tipping them to do big things this season. So, I mean, if he struggled against Ivan Toney, no disrespect to Tony, but if Ben White struggled against him, then he's going to have a hell of a time against Romelu Lukaku, who's one of the most physical forwards in the game at the moment. So it's going to be very tough for him.
Devon, do you think they will throw Lukaku straight into the mix? Obviously, we're not quite sure on his fitness levels, but he'll be ready for a game like that, won't he? A London derby.
He's a big time player, isn't he? He's just such an important player for Chelsea. Well, he will be an important player for Chelsea, sorry. I think Lukaku, looking at the situation, in terms of Chelsea forwards, you'd probably want to put Lukaku in front of that back line anyway, just because I think Havertz is a little bit more tidy, where actually they need somebody that's going to be a bit like a battering ram. They're going to get up against the defender, and especially if they go on Ben White, and we've already talked about the lack of cojones in that back line. So you get Lukaku against either of the centre halves, he's going to have a field day. And I think it's as long as, because we know Arsenal, they've had a couple of good results against Chelsea in the past, and they've had some couple of shockers as well. But they've just, if Arsenal turn it on, it's one of these games that they could win. But I just can't see that at all. Even if they put out the strongest 11 with Partey back in there and Aubameyang and Lacazette back. Obviously, I know there's injuries, but from the side that played against Brentford, you just expect Chelsea to steamroll them.
You got to hope that Emirates crowd is up for it and still have a bit of. Obviously, it was a disappointing defeat against Brentford, but luckily a game like this is coming on early in the season and not in December when they're, I don't know, in 10th or something, and they're on a very poor run. So hopefully the new season bounce is still there amongst the home support, and that can spur them on a little bit to be a bit more competitive.
Worth mentioning as well. Go on, Dev.
I was just going to say Arsenal fans don't help situations at Arsenal. It's there is a tendency to blow things massively out of proportion. And I know we've just spent the last couple of minutes and then the Brentford game talking about how bad Arsenal were, but even now they want rid of Arteta already, and there's always, it's a bit like just too much negativity, and you think they just need to realise what's happening, and there's going to be another couple of years like this.
Yeah, although I think negativity is pretty set into that club by this point, to be honest, as sad as that is. I think it might be worth mentioning as well, Arsenal have got a good recent record against Chelsea. They've won their last 3, did the double over them last season, and obviously won the FA Cup final against them just before that. So that is that maybe something to take with them, or does it not really mean a lot in the grand scheme of things?
I don't know. Considering how Chelsea perform, like I say, the players they've still got to come in, like I say, and Mason Mount, who's a key player, has been a key player for them for a while now. Had a brilliant game against Palace. Trevor Chalobah, what a debut he had with that brilliant goal. So there's so much to worry about for Arsenal from a Chelsea standpoint on both ends of the field. It'll be classed as a shock if they win this game for sure.
Yeah, absolutely, it will. That should be an entertaining one on Super Sunday. I have to say, I'm a bit disappointed that Wolves-Tottenham isn't going to be televised. It's taking place on Sunday, but I don't think it's televised anywhere in the UK. But that should be a good watch just for the people in the stadium. I'm sure Ed Hagee and the like buzzing for that one. And I'm sure that there'll be a vlog on his channel. But we ought to maybe mention some other teams who we were impressed by last week. Devon, are there any that you would particularly like to pick out?
Yeah, I think West Ham looked really, really good. Sort of, even though they've lost Jesse Lingard after his loan spell, they still look really good going forward. And I think Ben Rama were very important to that. And I think he'll have sort of a breakthrough year after a year of not featuring too much. But I think now he's properly settled in, I think he'll be a more important player. Hopefully in terms of my fantasy team as well, after getting me some good points this weekend. But I just think the attacking side to West Ham, they're starting to be really entertaining to watch. They was very relaxed on the defending side, as we saw, but this 4 goals opening game of the season, you can't go wrong. It's been goals this weekend, hasn't it? And also, we loved him at Wednesday. I know Harry would also be echoing the sort of applause to him for his time at Southampton, but Mikel Antonio becoming West Ham's joint all-time record goal scorer in the Premier League era is absolutely brilliant. And his sort of rise from coming from non-league, then signing with Reading, going a couple of loans, signing for a massive club in Sheffield Wednesday, then going back down to Forest and then coming to West Ham. It's been a good rise for him in a good few years.
Yeah, and I think that result and that second half performance in particular kind of showed that if West Ham are maybe able to strengthen a little bit more in the next couple of weeks, what a good team they could be this season, both in the Premier League and in Europe. So, Sam, with Lingard, do you think that's something which they could maybe push for again? I know the suggestion is that Solskjaer might use him as a backup option, but is that really what he wants to be at this point of his career?
Yeah, I think personally for Lingard himself, he should make a move from Manchester United because, like you say, he's going to be a player. If he stays, he's going to play 15 to 20 games in the season and play a bit part role. If he goes back to a team like West Ham, he's going to be one of the main players, but Devon alluded to it there. If he doesn't come, Ben Rama is going to have to step up a little bit because his debut campaign wasn't the most inspiring, to be honest. I think he got 6 assists and 1 goal in the end, which isn't fantastic. He's going to have to step up his output a little bit if West Ham want to reach the same heights that they did last season. But yeah, really a brilliant performance and then ruthless counter-attack in a lot of occasions in that game, which probably showed that Newcastle probably need 1 or 2 more additions in midfield and a defensive midfielder, because I don't think Shelby or Hayden is going to cut it for them, really, to be honest. But yeah, a really good performance from them.
Absolutely, it was. And Manchester United, we should probably mention them. I'm surprised we've got this far in without mentioning them because they topped the Premier League after the first weekend. I mean, I know we did say the table doesn't matter, so that's probably ultimately why they haven't been mentioned. But they were missing several players last week, but they still stuck 5 past Leeds United at Old Trafford. Very convincing from them. And Paul Pogba got 4 assists. Sam, can he maybe start to perform consistently this year, do you think?
More than he did in the entire of last season, if I'm not mistaken. I think he got 3 last season in total. So it just shows when you get willing runners around him, players that are willing to make those darting runs like Bruno Fernandes and players like that, and he has the time to collect the ball from the defence, turn and then pick his pass, because he's just a brilliant passer of the ball. I saw that on a few occasions in that game. Then he can be a really dangerous player and a really effective player for Manchester United. And it was also, I think Greenwood's performance was interesting as well, getting his goal, maybe staking his claim to be the go-to number 9 for Manchester United this season, because they haven't brought anyone in that area. I know they've got Cavani, but he's getting on a bit. I don't know if he's going to be able to play a full season in that position as the starting man. So maybe Greenwood can be that man, because he's got that raw finishing ability that we've already seen on many occasions in his short career.
Yeah, absolutely. And United head to Southampton this weekend. I thought it might be worth mentioning Aston Villa as well, as they began life without Jack Grealish with a defeat to Watford. Devon, do you maybe worry for Villa slightly, or do you think it was simply just a pretty difficult opening fixture against Watford, who are pretty eager after getting promoted?
Well, I think we mentioned in the last one in the Premier League preview that Watford were just so unpredictable. We wouldn't know who would start, who would be the star men, and sort of how they would approach this one. And obviously, Xisco's done a fantastic job since he came in and completely transformed their season from they were doing all right in the Championship, then actually being one of the front runners with yourselves, Norwich. But a few ones likes of Cuco Hernandez, who been loaned out for the last couple of years, coming in, scoring an absolutely belting goal. And I think Watford just sort of looked like the side that finished the season with Nigel Pearson when they had that resurgence. And I think if they play more like with less fear, as we talked about with Brentford, I think they've got the players. Ismail Assar is a fantastic player that can light up any sort of Premier League team in that division. And obviously, we've got Ben Foster in there, and if Watford are playing well, we're going to get more entertaining videos, so we're going to enjoy that even better. I think. But bring it back to Aston Villa as well, they've got the players in there. They've got obviously Buendia when he starts linking up. I think it's really good that even though we're in the 97th minute, Danny Ings is now off the mark, and he could start a spell of a scoring spree. And I think it's just. I think it'll click for Villa, but again, it's going to be a couple of weeks for adjusting to life without Jack Grealish, even though one player shouldn't define a team, but it's hard to have that in because, especially for the fans aspect, they're going to miss him.
It was a disappointing result for Villa, but it was important that their new signings bedded in. And I think Ings, like you say, getting off the mark, Bailey had a big impact when he came on, providing the assist for John McGinn, and what a well-taken goal that was.
Yeah.
But yeah, first time I think it was a brilliant one.
I'm glad you mentioned that goal. That really was a lovely finish. They've got a couple of big games coming up, Villa, Newcastle at home next, and then Brentford the week after, also at home. So you'd expect them to win at least one of those, if not both of them. We'll probably move on from the Premier League now. Some games we haven't mentioned, which are taking place this weekend. Liverpool at home to Burnley. Then we've also got Man City, who didn't get off the mark last weekend. They've got Norwich this weekend. And then West Ham against Leicester on the Monday night, which could be an entertaining game. Let's not get into talk about that Man City Norwich game because I'd rather not think about it at this point, to be honest.
But George, just before we do though, what were it like being in a full Carrow Road, no restrictions, and actual under the lights as well?
Yeah, it was a really good night last week, despite the result, which was disappointing. But we kind of knew going into it, having had a pretty disrupted pre-season, that it was going to be difficult. But yeah, being back was brilliant. It was pretty surreal, to be honest, when the players walked out before the game, because you kind of looked around you and thought, okay, this really is happening. But no, it was really enjoyable, and I'm looking forward to the Etihad, even if our chances of a result are pretty slim. But we shall see. Yeah, absolutely. We'll move on then, just to touch on the Championship, because of course they've been going for one extra week and they've played 2 more games than the Premier League. And after 3 rounds of fixtures, there are 6 teams sitting at the top of the division on 7 points. Well, they're not all top of the league, but they're all on 7 points. They are West Brom, Fulham, QPR, Bournemouth, Stoke, and Blackburn. I wanted to mention West Brom, who are top of the tree on goal difference, because I have to say, when I saw Valerian Ismail go in there, I had a few doubts, because while he was brilliant at Barnsley last year and transformed them into a playoff team, I was thinking, is he going to get his style working at the Hawthorns? Is he going to do it quickly enough? And he absolutely has. At the time we're recording, it was just last night where they beat Sheffield United 4-0. Yeah, Devon, 4-0.
So sorry, the line went off then again. Can you just repeat that?
Incredibly, they only had 35% possession, but I suppose that is his style, and it's working really well for them, isn't it, Sam?
Yeah, it looks like they're going to be a very, very entertaining team to watch this year. They scored a lot of goals. I think it's 15 now from 3, so they're definitely going to be one to tune in if they're on the telly. So yeah, like you say, a few question marks. He did do very well with Barnsley last season, Ismail, but he's still relatively inexperienced in this league. But he's got a great team that he's inherited there at West Brom, and Alex Mowat had a brilliant game last night against Sheffield United, getting that goal, and he's going to be great for them, making those dying runs from midfield. He's got great forwards for that level in Robinson and Grant and players like that. You can get your goals, as we've seen already. So they're going to be a tough team to stop this year in the Championship.
Yeah, and Devon, who else has impressed you at the top of the second tier so far?
I think just West Brom are going to be an exciting side to watch. Like I think, especially with the with the players that they've got, and Sam mentioned about the style. What we'll see is that when you've got a good counter-attacking side with good players in that, they are entertaining to watch, and it also gives them hope that when they go, I said when, because there's still a lot to go, but you'd expect West Brom to be going up again. Is that when they are in the Premier, if they are in the Premier League, then this sort of style could help them stay up if they were to go up in the Premier League, because sort of absorbing pressure and hitting them on the counter. We saw against Bournemouth, who I'm sure we're going to talk about in a couple of minutes. They were just, it was a great game, that opener, mainly because Bournemouth tried to be a bit more elegant, a bit more possessive, and then West Brom would win the ball high up the field, and then you'd have about 4 players sprinting into the area, and it was just entertaining to watch, albeit defenders scoring, but phenomenal. And I think he'll just adapt as the season goes on.
Yeah, absolutely. As for Bournemouth, then you led quite neatly into it there. They've also had a pretty solid start under Scott Parker. A good win at Forest at the weekend, and then who was it? They beat Birmingham last night, didn't they? I should have written that down, but it came to mind. They've just let Danjuma go, so they've got a few new players in the mix. I think Gary Cahill is on his way. They're going to be up there again, aren't they, this year?
Yeah, and they didn't even have Brooks against Birmingham last night as well, because he was suspended, and they had a slow start, but they got into it as the game went on. And Parker's possession style, like Devon mentioned there, seems to be working so far for them. And if they can get Solanke in the goals, I know he's not been the most prolific over his career. If they can get him in the goals get him in the goals and implement Parker's style more as the games go on, they'll be a tough team to beat as well.
Yeah, and a big game for them this weekend. They've got Blackburn, who, as I mentioned, are one of those teams on 7 points. So maybe one of them will lose their first game, or it could be a draw. Who knows? Devon, I know you've been taking a look at Stokes Chilean superstar, who's gone mad over the pond in South America. What have you got to tell us about him and Stoke as a whole?
Stoke is, I don't think we can spend 5 minutes talking about how bad Stoke is, unless we get please welcome Ben Derber to the podcast. I think Blackburn's start in general, not talking about Brent Brereton, Diaz, which we've got. I think it's better to say that than just Brent Brereton. It sounds like
I'm sorry. I just associated him with Stoke. I apologise. He plays for Blackburn, doesn't he?
Yeah.
I'm sorry. I don't know why I made that link. For some reason, I had it written down that he played for Stoke.
Yeah, because he was born in Stoke-on-Trent, I think.
Was he really? Okay.
Yeah.
There we go. We can cut that bit out.
No. Sam.
That's what you meant all along, George. I know.
Yeah. This comedy act that we're starting to bring it more entertaining is working now, isn't it? So it's like Chuckle Brothers on it. No, we've got obviously Blackburn started the season brilliantly, and I wanted to say that last season they started really well, and towards Christmas time is when it started to roll down the hill massively for Tony Mowbray, and I think it'll go a similar way. And the analogy was, for me, that I said earlier about bringing it to this is literally like a person splits up with a missus, and the missus in this would be Adam Armstrong going to Southampton, and is the Blackburn have got a couple of, he's gone out, he's had a couple of nice, bringings back. He's got Ben Brereton there, 2 goals in 3 games already, but only got 7 goals, 4 assists last season, taking 1.8 shots per game. And he's also got Sam Gallagher there, 8 goals, 3 games last year. Best return he's ever had has been 11, but he's only taking 1.2 shots per game. And the thing that Blackburn are going to miss is that shots per game thing, and that he's sort of enjoying his spell here, but he's thinking about his ex Adam Armstrong taking 4.7 shots per game, and he's missing it eventually. He's having all this fun, and Armstrong's gone away now, but eventually he's going to get jealous of what Armstrong's got now in the Premier League, because he's already started well. He's got his shots per game up as well, scored a goal already. And I just think that eventually Blackburn will they'll realise that he's not there, and I think they'll just fall off a cliff and finish 14th or something like that. Yeah,
they got a small squad, haven't they? Because they didn't embargo, but they sort of, for these first few games, sort of had that siege mentality, because they're an unfancy team at the moment, a bit like how Derby have started as well. They've got a small squad, but a strong unit clearly, and that's served them well for these first couple of games. But as we get into the championship season, we get into the rigors, get into all those midweek games, I think that's going to take an impact when you don't have the backups, you don't have a deep squad.
Yeah, I think you might be right on that. I've got written down reminding me to mention Swansea, because they've had a summer of big change, and it doesn't really seem to be working for them at the moment. But I think this is kind of something that they maybe should have envisaged with Russell Martin going in. Do you think now is the time to panic, or is it really just very early and they need to be patient with him?
Well, it's again it's a team that's experienced a lot of change over the summer, like you say, managerially with Russell Martin, who's going to need time, and they've lost a lot of big players. Andre Ayew, I think, is the main one. He was obviously a quality player for them, quality player for that level, and also a big leader as well, which is really hard to replace. And they have struggled so far. But like you say, Russell Martin's a young manager, and he's going to need some time to implement his style, I think. And hopefully the Swansea fans are patient with him.
Yeah, I hope so too. Devon, then, we did mention the West Brom win over Sheffield United. Where do you think it's gone wrong for them in the first 3? Because they were heavily tipped to be one of those teams pushing for the automatics. Of course, there's loads of time left, but they're still yet to score a goal, aren't they?
It just mirrors from what they was doing last season, because there were games last year where we know the first season in the Premier League where they took it by storm, backed by a full Bramall Lane most weeks as well. Is that as soon as they lost that, and where their form started to dip in the Premier League is where they got more on the ball, they'd hold ball in deeper areas and then try to attack through the wings. And I think it's just it's like when mentioned about people going insane, it's the same thing over and over again. And I think just Sheffield United have become stale, and in terms of the progression is similar. The way they attack is just the same thing again and again and again. And because they've not got sort of anyone clinical up top that'll take that responsibility. Obviously, Billy Sharp's probably their most potent goal scorer in terms of that person. That would be the end product. But he's getting on. He's coming into the last couple of years now. And I think Sheffield United just need a formation change. They need a style change, just because they're just going to continue to be mundane and struggle to score. And again, to bring it back to their Premier League season, that's what we saw last season. They tried to be a little bit more possessive, and it just didn't work. You just needed that wilder style to be a bit gung-ho and take a risk. And it's saying that people are a bit more aware of that, and people know how to defend against it.
I think it's just gone a bit stale there. There's not been a lot of change from the last Premier League season as well. And Jukanovic has tried to implement his style, but they've been so used to Wilder's style that they're going to take some time to adapt to it as well. And I think that's what we're seeing in these first few games.
Yeah, and I think Jokanovic will know that he needs to get results there sooner rather than later. We're kind of around the hour mark now for the pod, so if we're ready, guys, unless we've got anything else to mention on the Championship, shall we wrap it up? Yeah, I think we're kind of sorted. I'm getting a nod of the head. Yeah. So yeah, that's kind of all we've got time for this week. Enjoy the second weekend. Don't forget to check your FPL team if you're playing before the weekend, because you don't want to get unstuck by that. I need to find a way to get Mo Salah into my team.
Same.
But yeah, we will see you next week. We'll probably be back to having 4 of us on the show next week as well. But thank you very much for watching or listening. See you next time.